to the first episode of my video podcast interview series where I sit down with non-drummer musicians to discuss the drums. My name's Tyler Dempsey, and I'm a drummer and educator from Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. And this is the first episode, the pilot episode, if you will. And this concept came to me out of my love for drum podcasts and drum interviews. I'm a huge fan. I think that this day and age with the internet, there's no better resource than to hear straight from your favorite drummer's mouth what their process was like, where they came from, and how they got to the point that they're at today. But within the drum community, I felt as though there was something that was missing, and that was to hear from non-drummer musicians. After all, drummers aren't necessarily hiring drummers for gigs, but other instrumentalists are hiring the drummers. So it's important to hear their perspective, to hear what they feel is important to becoming a musical drummer. So this is my hope with this series, is to be a resource for myself and fellow drummers to hear firsthand from instrumentalists as to what's important to hear coming from the drums. So today I'm thrilled to have my first subject, if you will, somebody who's been a dear friend of mine and a mentor over the years. He's one of my favorite musicians, the very talented Dr. Matt Vashlishan. Before I welcome Matt onto the call, I just want to give you a brief background. Dr. Matt Vashlishan is a multi-woodwind instrumentalist from the Pocono Mountains. He received his doctoral degree in saxophone performance from the University of Miami, his master's degree from William Paterson University, and his bachelor's degree from Eastman School of Music. Matt currently runs the jazz program and the big band at East Stroudsburg University, as well as the Water Gap Jazz Orchestra, which used to be the Phil Woods Big Band. Matt's currently a member of NEA jazz master Dave Liebman's group, Expansions. Sit back, relax, listen to what Matt has to say about the drums. I really hope that this helps and that this is a resource to help you become a more musical drummer. Check it out. Hey, Matt. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
You missed the intro. You weren't privy to the intro, but in the intro, we described what the podcast is going to be about. And this podcast is where I sit down with non-drummer musicians and get their take on the drums. And I also mentioned that you've been an important mentor to me and really helped me as a person and a drummer. So I really look forward to hearing your your thoughts.
I thought you told them the truth in the intro.
That is the truth. We've had lots of private conversations where you talked about the drums in a candid way, and I always found those conversations to be helpful, and I think that's kind of something that's lacking with a lot of jazz interviews or drum interviews where we don't really get the truth about it. So,
Well, I have my opinions.
Awesome. So first off, I'm going to start with an easy one. In your mind, since you're primarily a jazz musician, in your mind, what is the role of a drummer in a band, specifically in a jazz context? And you can go small group versus big band. What's the role of the drummer in a band?
I mean, I almost think they're the same in a way. I mean, the result is different, but I think the main function should be the time. I think a lot of people focus more on like enjoying playing the drums than playing time, and I think it kind of gets in the way. I mean, if you think about the power you have on a drum set, with all the drums and all the cymbals and all your appendages going, I mean, like you can do a lot of damage, or you can focus all that stuff into a common good, which is like the time. Like you're taking care of the time. I mean, everyone's responsible for the time in a way, but I mean, you are the audible definition of the rhythm and the time, you know what I mean? So I think that should be the first responsibility. And in a big band setting, you can talk about like setting up rhythms or this or that, but it's kind of the same function in a small group. It's just a little different. Like you're either reacting to what a soloist did, or you're feeding them a little something to make something happen, or you're reacting to the piano combing. It's always like putting the finishing touches on all the rhythmic elements,
Right.
So I think that's the main focus is time and rhythm, but not necessarily like the overplaying of the drums.
Right. So playing with good time makes or breaks the
Yeah, I
situation.
mean, if you're playing quarter notes on a ride cymbal really, really, really well with a really good pocket and I mean, there's not much else needed in a
Right.
lot of ways, and I think a lot of people might get bored with that, but that's the hardest thing to do,
Right.
is play quarter notes in a way that propels the band. It doesn't really rush. It like propels things and keeps things back in a pocket.
So in a jazz context, how do you view the relationship between the sax and the drums? Now, let's focus on small group in this instance. Do you
hmm
view that relationship in a certain way compared to maybe your relationship with a piano player or a bass player?
Yeah, because the drums are the only instrument that would be. I mean, you don't have to, but I mean, they're basically playing the entire time. You know, I mean, a horn player's eighth notes is directly connected to the ride cymbal and how you're playing a swing pattern. It's not as much snare drum comping or bass drum stuff as it is like how that ride cymbal is happening. What do the eighth notes feel like? Because there's a lot of different ways you can interpret jazz eighth notes.
Right.
You know, but how that ride cymbal is like dancing around, not just playing like the same rhythm, but how varied it is, how the variation in the ride cymbal accents like the lines that the horn player is playing. I mean, it's a direct communication a lot of times.
Right.
I think the piano player is more hooked up with the snare drum and comping in that regard because they're kind of doing the same things.
Sure.
And then of course the bass drum is hooked up with the bass player because it's all on the same frequency. I mean, when you mix things together, I mean, that's what you're focusing on.
Right. Right.
So you could think of each. I mean, you have to be a complete sounding drum set. But I mean, you could think of each of these elements as catering to those different parts of the band,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is tough. It's a tough job. you
Right.
know I
Yeah.
couldn't imagine thinking about more than one thing at a time. So
Yeah.
you know
It could be tricky. It could be tricky.
yeah, and you have to
Wh-
play with good time on top of it.
Right. Right. One thing that I noticed that great musicians have an uncanny ability to just be able to listen to a musician, and in this case we're focusing on drums, so be able to listen to a drummer and within a few seconds be able to form an opinion about a drummer or musician. So when you're listening to
hmm
a drummer, what are some things that you listen for when forming an opinion about said drummer?
um I think the first thing, I mean, my gut reaction is just to say taste,
Okay.
because that's a big thing. But when I hear a drummer that like really stands out, it's their ability to create this excitement and propulsion within their whatever their version of playing time is. I mean, it just stands out. Like some drummers just sound flat. Like it sounds fine, but it's not really exciting. And another drummer could be playing exactly the same thing, but it's just it's like you just want to like move around, or like you can't sit still because of what it feels like, what it's pushing the band to do. um and I guess some of that has to do with their interaction with the bass player as well, but I mean, a great drummer can do it by themselves. So that's the first thing, and then taste, because you don't want to overdo any of this stuff, and you don't want to be too active, and you don't want to be, I mean, it's like less is more, but then just enough
Right.
to do what is needed.
So that's
It's
the tricky
maturity.
skill to develop, is to be able to play with good time that doesn't necessarily move, get faster or slower, but create
hmm
this illusion of propulsion
hmm
and forward momentum, even though the time
some
isn't
of it
moving.
some of it is getting faster.
Okay.
I mean, some of the greatest recordings I've ever heard get faster.
Right.
Very few get slower. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's people get caught up in that too, but it's like, um like rushing is like the end of the world or something, but it's not if it feels right.
Right.
And that's like an experience thing, I guess. I mean, it has to feel good first, and then you can talk about like how the tempo is fluctuating, I guess.
Right.
But I mean, you can get a very, very good result. I mean, obviously if you're like speeding up a lot, it's not cool, but I mean, within reason, it's fine.
And it kind of involves having everybody on the same page if the tempo
hmm
is getting excited. if one person is just rushing like crazy,
Mhm.
perhaps it's not the greatest effect, right? Everybody
Yeah,
kind of has to be on the
it
same
could
page.
get a little vibey, I guess,
Yeah, right.
but it's usually like most of the times that I see it, it's like, like the rhythm section is vibing a horn player.
Right.
But in some ways, it's like I mean, I feel like that's kind of what you get for being a horn player, though. Like you're kind of allowed to be out front. I mean, if it's wrong, it's wrong. But I mean, you're supposed to play with the time. I think it's interesting to play with the time. You don't want to just be like white paint on a white wall,
Yeah,
or like white crayon on a white sheet of paper. I mean, you have to have some kind of contrast or like something different happening over top of the canvas. You know what I mean?
hmm,
So, and that makes it harder. All the stuff we've already talked about, for especially for a drummer, like to hear a horn player like pushing and pulling and everything else,
right.
maybe playing rhythms that don't even really exist on paper necessarily. I mean, you know,
Yeah,
but it makes it harder to play a pocket or a groove or anything like that. But that's
sure,
what makes a good drummer good, is that they can do it
sure.
despite all that stuff going on, and they can still comp and they can still this or that.
Right.
So,
So if you were to audition a drummer, whether this be for your own group, I know that's not how
hmm
things typically work, but if you were to
yeah.
audition a drummer for your own group or maybe your university group, what would you have he or she do? And what are some skills that you would expect them to have in order to win the audition?
Are we talking students or professionals?
Take it one at a time. I'm
All
interested in
right.
both.
Well, I mean, students have to show a a basic understanding, obviously, or else they can't participate, because I can't be teaching people how to read music or anything like that, obviously. But like a a basic understanding of the function of the drums, like we've described, someone that doesn't want to just come in and like showcase all the fills they learned over the weekend or something like that, but like
Right.
can understand their job, the role of the drums, and that shows uh like the ability to grow and learn. I mean, I don't care if like someone can't do something, but it's like they have to possess this humble kind of like interest
Sure.
to be able to grow and to be able to be like molded in a way. Trust what I'm saying.
Right.
Um, but professionally, boy, it's tough. I mean, it's the kind of thing that like you play with somebody and
Okay.
I guess it could depend on the music. Like if you have a specific vision for what the music is supposed to be, then you could have three very, very good drummers, but one or two might just not be it from a musical perspective. Like they just might not sound right. I
Sure.
mean, we've all heard like the more modern kind of like fusiony jazz drummers, and then we've heard very traditional drummers.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with either one of them, but like you're going to use one for one thing and one for another.
Right.
And some people may not be able to do both, and honestly, like maybe they shouldn't,
Yeah.
just because you have to have your own thing.
Sure.
um but yeah, it still comes back to like, I don't want them overplaying. I don't want them you know taking away from the point of the music.
Okay.
So that's something that you can just kind of feel after a tune or so.
Something you assume that they have together coming into it would be a general level of playing. Most guys are playing at a high level,
hmm
but that they could read and that they're going to be
yeah,
receptive to taking direction to follow the music
yeah,
that you've
almost
written.
everybody that you have coming in would be at a high level, I guess. But it's really like how they view the function of the drums on a level of like maturity, I guess.
Okay.
you know
Yeah.
and it still goes back to like, are you more excited about playing this music, or are you more excited about playing the drums? Because a lot of music doesn't require hardly anything. I mean, if it's a chill tune, and you know it could just like, look at the poinciana beat or something like that.
Right.
Like he didn't do anything else the whole tune, but it's like something that everybody talks about
Right.
forever.
Right.
Like who nowadays would be cool, like just playing that for however many minutes that was.
Right.
But it's exactly what was needed. you know so that's kind of what I'm saying. Like,
That
is somebody willing to do that without being told? Then they're probably the right fit.
sure.
Because they can do all this stuff, but they don't have to do it at any time. They never have to do it. they're prepared for it, but never use it.
That leads me to my next question, actually, and that's how much do you actually care about chops coming from the drums, or are there different skill sets that are more important to you?
I don't care about them at all. I
Okay.
mean, I care about them in a sense that, like, if you have to play a fast tune, you have to have them, and that's almost more important than playing like some complicated rudiments, because it's like you have to keep that tempo going for as long as it needs to be going, and that's a form of technique. It's endurance, and it's precision, and it's speed, and it's accuracy, and it's all that stuff. So that is technique. Of course, you have to be able to play drum solos, but I mean, a solo is whatever you want it to be. So if you don't have like a ton of chops per se, and it's a fast tune, then you just play in a way that you can deal with the tempo.
Right.
It could still be creative. It could still be very, very interesting.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I just care about it in terms of like accomplishing what's needed.
Sure. So it all comes back to the music and what the music calls
I
for.
guess it does, yeah.
And you and I have
Or
talked. Go ahead.
what the music calls for, or like what like if they can play within their own limitations,
Hmm.
because you can. I mean, you can serve the music by playing a drum solo with hardly anything happening.
Right.
So it's how they can take themselves and insert themselves into the situation for the sake of the music or what's required.
Right. And you and I have talked about, at least for me, how I'd be working on a lot of very drumistic kind of exercises or working
Hmm.
on technical facility around the drums. But you
Hmm.
made it a point to tell me how important it was to focus on the musicality aspect of it and what's actually going to be applicable in a musical situation. A lot of the drumistic stuff is maybe only spotlighted in a solo situation and maybe not what
Yeah.
should be spent the most
But
time focusing on.
I I think, I mean, a lot of the times I just play devil's advocate, or I fight the point for the sake of the conversation. But if you're talking about like sitting at home and working on technique, I mean, you have to do that in a certain way, and it has to be like practicing fills or practicing a particular kind of solo or whatever. You have to do that. But oftentimes when you do that, you take that into the situation
Mm,
when you're playing live, and the situation may not require any of that stuff. So you have to forget it. You practice just to develop like a means to deal with things. Like you have to have a toolkit of some kind, but then you have to be able to hear all that stuff you just practiced in a completely different environment and put together completely backwards or this way or that way. You have to learn what to take out, what to leave in, how to rearrange it, because I mean, any live situation from this point forward will not be anything that you've practiced. It
right,
just won't be. I mean, like the rest of this conversation, depending on what I say, will go completely different than any way that we've planned it.
right,
I could say something deliberately that would throw the whole thing off. But that's what a live situation is like. I mean, you don't know what the bass player is going to do. You don't know like if the leader's going to count the tune off too fast, too slow. I mean, if you've been practicing something at a certain tempo, like a groove or a solo or whatever, and then the tempo is like 20 clicks slow, well, it's not going to work anymore. You
right,
can't just play that stuff slower. I mean, you'd come up with a whole new set of things. So that's why it's like many people just regurgitate what they've been learning, but the jazz part, the creative part, the improvisation part is like, how do I make something up that fits this exact moment?
right,
That's the creative part. And I think we're just so stuck on like playing what we learned that we steamroll right through the moment, and we steamroll right through the this possibility that we're presented with of creating something so unique. So a lot of, I mean, in my past, my practice has been, I mean, I had a teacher at one point that gave all the students like a particular harmonic thing. They were like just sets of triads and stuff, and a lot of the students like just talked about it like it was the most ridiculous thing. Like, I would never play that. I don't want to sound like that. Well, we don't practice those things to do them. You practice them to get facility, to open your ears up to new shapes or sounds or this or that, so that you can like pick from it if you ever need it. You know, you want to practice things to be capable of anything. And if you don't practice things, then you can't ever call upon them in real time.
Sure.
You know, but it's not to like literally spit out what you've been dealing with, you know. And it could be like this. I've heard it so many times. Like you're playing a tune and the tune has a vibe and it has like a contour and everything's great until it gets to the drum solo. And then it's like this completely unrelated thing just because they have to get their like agenda across. But they could have based the beginning of the solo on so many things that came before,
right,
and lead it into the things that are coming next. But there's none of that. It's just like cut and like insert like random solo here. It has nothing to do with anything.
Sure.
It's not a bad solo, but it just doesn't have anything to do with anything.
That's kind of why I asked about the chops question, because
Yeah.
you know, I think it's, you know, let me know if you agree, but I think it's important to develop skill sets, not just licks and a bag of tools that you can pull from. Because like you mentioned, there's been so many times where I worked on something at a certain tempo and went to try to apply it, and it's as if it's a completely different idea altogether at a different tempo or whatever the case may be. So trying to develop skills that will be translatable to no matter what situation you're in, no matter who you're playing with or what tempo you're at or what genre you might be playing. I find that to be really
I mean,
important.
I've had students that there's a lot of teachers that will teach like licks specifically, you know. I think it's just some of that. I always relate the licks to transcriptions somehow, you know, because then you get the context.
Right.
Because that's the other thing. Like if you're practicing a lick, it's probably from a transcription of a solo where they did what we're talking about.
Right.
They took what they were practicing and they inserted it into the real time and the real moment at the right spot that was dictated to them by whatever the bass player, the piano player, the drummer, like the food before the gig, I don't know. But like they put it there for a reason. They didn't just like learn it like we are. Like we're saying, oh, that's a cool 2-5-1 lick or something like that, or a scale or whatever. But why was it there in the first place? So that, you know, I won't ever give people licks. I won't teach them anything like that. I'll have them discover them from a transcription, but then you see the whole global reasoning behind it. You know, you have a recording to reference. And then, you know, even then I have them practice it in a way that they kind of abandon the actual literal lick pretty early on, you know, so that you can start coming up with your own things or understand how to use it. You know, it's all application.
Speaking of practice and application, what do you think, this is a general broad question, but what do you think drummers should be focusing in their practice? Now let's pick a specific, like intermediate type players, and it could be any genre, but we're talking about developing skill sets that are important to be a musical drummer. So what are some things that they should be focusing on in their practice rather than just chops or licks or whatever?
Well, we're going to go back to the time thing, but it's like how you're doing it. You know, it's not necessarily playing with a metronome, because the metronome is spoon feeding you the time in a way. I mean, maybe playing along with recordings more. I mean, I'm not sure how many people do that. That might be a thing. I don't know. I don't talk to a lot of drummers like when they're studying with people, but I mean, you know, trying to get the feel, like playing along with with Tony Williams or something, or playing along with a rhythm section, because then you get the whole thing. You get the bass and the drums and everything else kind of together, and then you can feel what you could feel what it's like to be in that situation and try to mimic the drummer. But then I know we've talked about this, some of the recordings, I know Bill Charlap has a few, and he has incredible time and his band has incredible time. But there's a couple tracks on a few CDs I could think of that don't have drums at all. So it's just bass and piano, and then you can just record yourself or play along with those tracks,
Right.
because they're playing the time better than with a drummer in some cases. And then you can just insert yourself and try to feel make it feel as good as it does without drums, but it's a lot of time stuff though. I mean, obviously you have to do rudiments and things like that. I mean, that's like the drummer scales,
Sure.
so it's like you can't ignore that stuff either. Like you can't just practice the cool stuff.
Right.
I think a lot of people just want to practice the cool stuff.
So in
But
general,
that's why nobody has good time.
having a good technical facility, but also really focusing on time and feel, that might not be the most glamorous thing to work on. Putting the metronome at
But then
60,
don't pick the drums.
right?
Honestly, like if you don't want to work on time, don't pick the drums.
Right.
That's all the drums are.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, if you still like percussion, like play the vibes or something.
Right.
I mean, you still have to play time, but it's not like as blatantly obvious.
Sure.
I mean, there's no other point. And endurance, because that's one thing that I never really realized. I mean, now that I play the wind synth and stuff, I'm playing bass lines along with recordings and stuff. And like I just never realized as a saxophone player, like to play the entire tune and not like just play your melody or your solo and go chill.
Yeah, right.
It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And with drums, like playing each beat and each subdivision of the beat and making it feel good, like you have to do that. Like listen to like any major recording, like the drums don't ever sound out of place.
Right.
There's not one beat, the entire tune, whether it's 3 minutes, 8 minutes, whatever, they don't play a single beat that sounds out of place like the best drummers.
Right.
How in the world do they do that? So that's, I mean, you have to work up to that, obviously, because if you have one lapse, whether it's like a muscular thing or a mental thing or whatever, it's like it's over. The whole groove is over.
I see that a lot in my private studio. Students that can play something correctly for 1 or 2 times through, and then I see it. There's just like this mental thing that switches, and I really think it has to do with social media, the internet, and everything being instant, where they play something correctly and the mind just goes. And I know from
like I did it, and now I don't have to anymore,
right,
or something. I don't know.
And I know from playing live that if your mind wanders just a hair, stuff can get uncool quick.
And you have to record yourself.
Yeah, that's good.
I record every single gig. I mean, I think you should record every single thing you do, even if you're playing at home for 2 minutes. It's so easy nowadays. Just record it, and then listen to it. It's not going to be what you thought it was, and you'll find these inconsistencies way faster if you do that. Don't wait for somebody to tell you about it.
Right.
I mean, you could probably hear it. I mean, as you get better, I mean, there's a certain point that you can't really tell, but as you get better and better, you'll hear a note or two that's not right. You just got to fix it.
All right, here's a 2-part question.
Yes.
If you could wave your magic wand and make each drummer that you work with the ideal drummer for you, what would that look like? And the second part, what are some of your biggest drummer pet peeves?
So I'm making the perfect drummer
for you. I don't think there's one perfect drummer for everybody, but for you.
Boy. It would have to be like, it would have to be someone that has like a mix of traditional and modern in terms of sound of the drums, like cymbals and snare drum and all that. Because I don't like super modern stuff, but I don't like way traditional either. Like I like I don't know what you would call it, like an organic kind of, the ride cymbal's not too dark, like it has like a 60s kind of brightness to it and like definition and things like that. But they would have to be like less assertive most of the time, but just taking care of business, but then be able to accommodate when you want things to become active. Because all this being said, there's a point at which during a solo, like you wanted to get like a little aggressive at times. You want it to be active. You want to be like fighting back and forth with the drummer and know that if you leave space, they're going to like take care of it. And most situations I've found, the drummer will tire out before I do. That's not like a me thing. It's just like I want to like keep going and like push and push, and like they do it, and then like there's always a point that I feel they give up on it.
Mm.
Even if they come back, they always give up, and it's like it kind of just leaves you like, all right, I guess I'll finish now. Like I'll just be done now too. Like there's no real,
Do you think that's a
like
stamina thing or a
I don't
listening
think
thing?
so. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like they're starting to get like self-conscious of what's going on, or they're just like, is this really supposed to be what they want, or like I don't know what it is. But
Right.
everybody usually gives up at some point, like except like the very good, like the top people, because they know
Right.
they've played with so many people, you know.
Yeah.
And it could be like a saxophone player could just be like holding out a note or just like doing, but it's like everything that's come for it. This is like the not relying on your training thing by, it's like reacting in the moment. Like it could be going and going and going and going and going. And then like, even if I stop playing, there should be something else.
Right.
Or if I'm not playing a lot of stuff, it's not mimicking me. That's not what I'm looking for. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Right.
Like a rhythm happens and then somebody plays the same rhythm like a measure later, like they're interacting with you. No.
Yeah.
It's like it's about like working with each other, like complementing each other. It's not by mimicking. But yeah, I don't know. So it would just be like the intuition to understand the contour of the tune. And that could be personal, and it could be like, you have two people that meet each other and they instantly hate each other, and then you have two people that meet each other and they're like best friends from the very beginning. It's like people have different levels of this intuition. And when, so that would be one of the perfect things, would be to meet somebody that sees eye to eye with the roles and what should happen over the course of a tune.
Would you relate that intuition to being a good listener? Like, is that a skill
Mm-hmm.
set that you think drummers
Well,
need
you
to
have to
develop too?
listen. Yeah, you have to listen, but then you have to know how to react. That's one thing that I talk about people that I like to do. Um, like if you look at, I don't know what you talked about specifically in the intro, but like playing with Dave Liebman, for
Yeah.
example, or playing with like Phil Woods maybe once, or playing with the big band, or like I'm not going to play a solo in the big band the same way I'd play a solo with Dave Liebman.
Right.
But like how could you like practice and be the same person and accommodate both of those things? So it's, you almost can't, in a way. Like you have to use your identity to fit in and not sound so out of, but now some people might disagree with this, but this is just the way I feel. Like I have to cater to the situation. I think somebody like Dave Liebman would say exactly the opposite, because he plays like full on like how he is no matter what, which is why he's sought after,
Right.
and maybe why I'm not. But but I'm gonna hear the tune. I'm gonna hear the other musicians. I don't want to sound out of place in reference to those musicians. If they play a certain way, I'm going to be in the best interest of the gig.
Right.
So when I play with someone like Lieber, free or like some crazy thing, like I'm obviously not going to play like I did in the big band,
Right.
you know, on a very like mild, laid back 2-5-1 kind of tune. I'm gonna try to take what I know, all the scales that I've practiced, all the stuff, and hear what's happening, and try to be that. It's like you can't. If I was just practicing like Phil Wood solos the day before, and I go play a gig with Dave Liebman, like there's no way I'm gonna play like Phil Woods.
Right.
There's no way. Why would you do that? So it's like people have to listen and understand how to hear themselves in that situation, not overpower the situation to return it back to the way they want to play, because that might not be the right. Then we go back to why you hire certain people for certain things, and hopefully the leader will hire you because they want you to do your thing, but that's not always the case, especially when people have to work. You want to serve the purpose of the event.
And I've heard you talk about one thing that I believe you enjoy in a really strong drummer is that they bring their own personal thing to a
Hmm.
situation. Then I guess
Hmm.
perhaps an ideal drummer would bring their thing with their confidence, but also be able to fit in to the
Of
musical
course.
situation,
Hmm.
not just do their thing
Hmm.
and kind of shut everything else out and make everybody
Hmm.
come to them.
Hmm.
They're a little
Hmm.
bit more flexible.
Hmm. For sure.
Cool. Can you
What
can
was the
you
second part of your question, though? I can't
Oh
remember the
yeah, yeah.
second part.
Biggest pet peeves. We can't skip that one. What are your biggest drum pet peeves?
I'm
You hate
sorry
when
I asked.
somebody does this. You hate when somebody does that. Tell me, because I don't want to do any of these things. You know.
I hate when they play too loud.
Okay.
Period. The drums are loud.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate when they play too loud.
Okay.
I just hate it. I don't know why it has to be loud. I
And
just don't know.
sometimes that loudness could lead to like a heavier time feeling as well. No.
Yeah. And it's just distracting.
Yeah.
I mean, like, think about everybody else once in a while. Like, I'm blowing into like a saxophone. I mean, some saxophone players are insanely loud, and I think that's annoying too. But boy, like, we have to compete with that, you know? And like, we're not wearing earplugs, like
Yeah.
be a nice person. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
excitement doesn't mean loud. I mean, once again, some of the best drummers are like, their sound is full and projecting, but it's just not loud. Like, some drummers just sound like it's noise.
Right.
And it's not even that they're playing poorly, it's just like how they hit the how they hit the drums or something just sounds noisy, not like full.
Right.
And it's definitely not, I mean, you could probably speak to technique better than I can, but it's not like how hard you hit something that creates tone and projection.
Right.
It's how you hit it,
Right.
especially the cymbals. But I hate that. I just hate it. And then the horns have to play louder, and then it becomes, and they think that the horns playing louder means that the horns are excited.
Right.
So then they play louder, which is terrible. It's a
Yeah.
terrible situation.
Sure.
um I just think that it should be comfortable, and they should be sensitive to everybody being comfortable, because they have just like a bass player or a guitar player, like turning their amp up too loud. I mean, there's certain people in the band that have way more influence over whether people are comfortable or not.
Right.
So you have to be aware. You just have to be aware of that, or ask. Like, no one's, I mean, I would rather be a drummer and say, hey guys, like, is the volume okay, or do you want me to, instead of like them looking over at you halfway through the gig and just like, you know
Yeah. Right. Right.
and like, it shouldn't matter what they say, because aren't we all here for the same common thing here, is like to produce good music and do it effectively so that everybody's happy and having fun. Like, why should it be a drag?
Right.
So that's the number one thing, is volume. And then the other one is like, what I said before, is just this overplaying, or like they're playing and everything is fine, everything sounds so good, and then they just like whack the snare drum or something. Like, why are you doing that? you know just like these like random things that it just makes me think that people are an ass. Like, that's what it
Yeah.
is. It's like,
Yeah.
if they do certain things like this, I'm just like, and then it kind of ruins the whole thing for me. Like, everybody always starts at 100%,
Yeah.
and then they slowly chip away at it, I guess. And it's
Well,
like things like that. Like, if they're playing too loud or obnoxiously, like, now we're going to be down to like 90%. And if they just like whack these things out of nowhere, it's like, has no musicality whatsoever. You can do the same thing some other way, and it brings you down. I just feel like their ego is getting in the way or something. I don't know what it is. I don't
could
know what
be.
it is. Yeah.
I've heard teachers liken it to a conversation. Like if we're in a conversation right now and I just blurted out like just
Mm-hmm.
one word, I screamed
Yeah.
louder than the rest, you'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
what was the
That's
purpose of that
exactly what it
decision?
is. That's
Yeah,
exactly what it is.
right.
It's terrible.
Cool. All right. List me some of your favorite drummers, past and present, and why. Could be anybody.
Hmm. Let's see here. I'm terrible with names.
Uh oh.
You should have told me this.
Okay. Well,
Well, the obviously, like, all the blue note drummers are my favorite,
okay.
you know. I mean, because of the sound thing that we talked about, like Philly Joe or whatever, Art Blakey, like anybody,
Right.
anybody in the '60s or something is because, and it's it's what they did, but it's just what the instruments sounded like, I think, or what the recordings sounded like. I don't know what it is, but it has such a balanced, like natural kind of organic sound to it, the cymbals and everything. I just love it. I love it. I don't know why. But they also played the way I've been talking about.
Right.
Like that. Essentially just time. And that's where I don't get this like over interactive thing that you see it a lot in colleges now, like everyone's like talking about interaction. Well, what interaction? Like, how did they interact on like Kind of Blue?
Right.
There's no interaction. I mean, there was snare drum comping, but like, it's not like what they're doing now. Like, I don't know and it's just it's just so busy. Even Elvin Jones, which is obviously a favorite of mine,
Right.
like he's still playing time. Like he's not just like all over like Coltrane, you know what I mean? Like it's not like that. He lets Coltrane be Coltrane,
Right.
and just like does what is needed to elevate Coltrane. That's why he's there,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So he's obviously a favorite. Um, let's see. Modern stuff. I mean, Adam Nussbaum is a great one.
Yeah.
Is a great example because he has like the traditional and the modern, but he sounds like I like the old school people to sound.
Right.
Bill Gubin's the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a very traditional sound, like sound wise, but he plays modern.
Yeah.
Or traditional, or he plays
He can
however he
play it
wants to
all.
play.
Yeah. Right.
So it's people like that. I mean, I just love it. I just love it.
Awesome.
I guess the people I play with though, um, who do I play with? Who do I
Well,
play with?
am I allowed to interject or no?
Yeah, yeah.
I know that you've
It's been a
spoken
year and a
about
half since I played with anybody. So who do I play with? Nobody.
you've spoken about Mark Ferber and you really enjoy his
Mark Ferber
playing.
for sure.
Yeah.
So he's like, I mean, I hope I don't offend him, but I mean, I would consider him more modern sounding,
Right.
But the thing is as far as time goes and not getting in the way, absolutely better than anybody.
Yeah.
Like just better than anyone. Like it just feels so great to play with him. It's so consistent.
Right.
So, and his sound is great. I mean, I'm not saying it's not. I mean, it's just not a traditional sound. I think he would agree with that, Um, but boy, I mean, incredible. Ian Froman's another one. I mean, he's a modern sound. I don't think he would say he's a traditional sound. But he's very different than Mark, even though they could be both in the more modern type thing.
Sure.
But there's this like comfort. There's this command of the time that they have that you can't help but fall into it and deal with it.
Yeah.
And it feels great when you do. And if you try to, you can't fight it. You just can't fight it. And if you do, you sound like an idiot.
Yeah.
But
Right.
that's good because it means whatever they're doing is strong.
Right.
So that's and that's of course synonymous with Adam Nussbaum as well. It's just very, very good. So.
Hey, as we wrap stuff up, I appreciate you doing this. This was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any final words of advice for drummers out there? You covered a lot, and there's a lot to take from this conversation. But if you have any final words,
I think it's that you should approach the situations with a sense of humility or like humbleness, if that's a word. Just be like, but like don't drummers I think often get like lead trumpet syndrome, like because of their power they're given. I think they can kind of think that they're in the driver's seat, and you're not unless you're leading the band. Then you can do whatever you want. But I mean, you have to like just be open to criticism or suggestions, I guess, because it's people aren't like talking down to you or something like that if they say be quiet. Or it's just preference. And other people might tell you to play louder, but like you need to be open to whatever is required of you, you know? So that's a big one. Just like being a team player. And all the greatest guys are, you know, they will all listen.
Yeah.
So that and just like taking care of time first, you know, first before all the flashy stuff.
Yeah.
Because if you can't play quarter notes in time, you're not going to be able to play a fill in time. I mean, that has to groove too.
Right.
You know, I mean, you have to go in order.
Yeah.
Just don't worry about it. Like if you can't play as like fast or cool as like whoever, then that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
That's great advice. Time.
About being unique. You're yourself, you know? I mean, you can't have everybody being like a chop master.
Right.
For the sake of just playing something fast. I mean, it probably sounds nowhere near as good as a thought out, clever phrase.
Right.
That could be like way easier to technically play, you know? So you got to use your imagination.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you doing this. I hope all the
Yeah.
drummers out there listening are listening to what you're saying, working on time first, developing their musicianship to become a more musical drummer. I'm going to list your website down below in the description box if anybody wants to check out Matt. Go to mattbashlishan.com, I believe, but I'll list that down below.
That's it.
All right, Matt. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yep.